everybody, I'm Rife, Head of Events at WiredSussex. Welcome to this WiredSussex breakfast session. Thank you very much to Plus Accounting for sponsoring these breakfast sessions. I'm delighted to introduce Jason Woodford of SiteVisibility here to talk to us about SEO and digital marketing. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks very much, Rife, and thanks very much to Plus Accounting for sponsoring this as well. You've been my accountants actually since I started the business back in 2001. So there's the sponsors plug. So thanks for everyone for joining. I'm Jason Woodford, and I'm here to talk about how to keep up with SEO and digital marketing. This isn't an SEO deep dive. You can go to BrightonSEO to hear all about the technical aspects of SEO. There are more than 200 talks at BrightonSEO around the different aspects of SEO, and the next session is in July. So this is all about how to keep up, how I keep up with what's going on in SEO and digital marketing. So I'm just checking that the slides are changing before we get going.
All good.
All good, great. So I've been a marketer for all of my professional life at a number of PLCs, and then with the dot-com startup before I started SiteVisibility back in 2001. I built my first website in 1996, but I don't class myself as an SEO expert, despite having been in the business for more than 20 years. But I'm going to share with you, how I keep up to date with all things SEO. So a little bit about my company. It's SiteVisibility. This is what we're all about as an agency. We deliver digital growth for clients, but there are thousands of agencies, probably in Brighton alone as the global epicenter for digital. So what makes us special is that not only is SiteVisibility specifically set up to grow businesses online, but our recruitment agency called Clockwork Talent can help you build your own team. Eventually you can take your SEO in-house and all the other digital marketing, and we're really fine with that. You can fire us as an agency once your team is in place. And then other areas that we've been involved in are, through our weekly episodes of our podcast, the Internet Marketing Podcast, which I'll talk about a bit later, and the BrightonSEO family of conferences. This next one's taking place in July. That's how we can help improve the skills of your team. And that's what makes us really different. We like to share what SEO is all about, and it's absolutely critical for how we as a team, and me personally, how I keep up to date with all things SEO. Here are a few of our clients. We do work for all sorts of global organizations, as well as a lot of high growth, smaller, homegrown e-commerce brands. I guess the thing I was most intrigued by that we've done in the last few years was a brief from the European Commission to optimize the EU website for Brexit, which certainly was an interesting brief at the time. So here's what this talk is all about. Hopefully we're all in the right room. As I said, this isn't an SEO training course. There's just far too much to cover. But what I'm going to do is give you a helicopter view of how I see it. I'm really open to taking any questions at the end of the presentation, and afterwards if you want to book in some time with me as well. But hopefully you'll go away with some one or two nuggets that will help you move forward. So this is the agenda that I'm going to cover. I am going to briefly cover what is SEO, you'll be pleased to know. But also we asked 100 marketing directors what keeps them awake at night in terms of SEO. And these are the three areas that they were interested in. What is SEO strategy? How do you measure performance for SEO? And how do you budget for SEO? The amount of clients that come to us that don't know what they should be budgeting is large, and often one of the first areas we need to address. But I also asked my team of experts at SiteVisibility. We're a small agency. There are only 15 of us in-house. What are the red flags? What are the SEO rules? And I'm sharing those here with you as well. And then some tips on how we keep up. So hopefully that will prove useful to people. So before we start, here we go. What is SEO? So here's a definition that hopefully you're familiar with from our friends at Moz. The key here really is that generating tons of traffic is not SEO. You'll be amazed at how many SEO consultants and SEO managers or business managers just want lots of traffic from SEO. It needs to be quality traffic. It needs to be the sort of traffic you want on your website, and that's going to convert into leads or into e-commerce sales or into building your brand. And that's what good SEO is all about, is finding the right sort of traffic. So here are the topics from the marketing directors in a little bit more detail. And the big one, overwhelmingly, was how do I keep up to date? That sort of fear of missing out, and the sort of anxiety around the constant changes that they need to keep on top of. And those are a real anxiety, because it is important to keep on top of what's going on. So the areas are around your business strategy, as we talked before, and how do you measure performance, and there are some sub points there that sort of talk to each of those areas, and we'll cover those in a bit more detail in a moment. So in terms of strategy, these are some of the commonplace questions that get asked. The one that most frequently comes up is, how do you compete with the big boys? So for me, this is where the internet is just brilliant, because everyone can compete with the big boys. We work with the biggest of the lot in Procter & Gamble, and their whole business is based on the assumption that there are hundreds of small businesses that are looking to chip away at their large, global brands, and most of those businesses are built on SEO insights, ways to compete or outcompete with the big boys. So part of this, part of the SEO strategy is how you go about doing that. So there's a source for optimism for people. So when we're looking at SEO strategy, it's actually really similar to how most businesses develop their marketing strategies. Whereas on the left, we'll be looking at making sure that you've got strong data. And that's the first sort of foundation point. The most important area is making sure that you have strong data. And then that feeds into your strategy development in the middle, where we look at what are the objectives and how are we going to achieve those. And on the right-hand side, we work out what are the resources we need to start with. We look at what are the tactics we're going to use from an SEO perspective to achieve the results, and what resources we're going to need in-house and externally, and then what does the roadmap, what does the implementation plan look for, all of those. And so there's a strategy model there and this normally takes place in the first month of any activity. And it's critically important to get the strategy right, because if you've got a bad strategy with bad or unachievable objectives, all of the tactics that follow on from that can be a complete waste of time. So it's really important not to think about diving straight into tactics, to make sure you've got the strategy really clear. So to start with, the first thing is that we need to understand, practically what is the situation that we're in right now. And you can be thinking about this for your own businesses or businesses that you look after. What is their competitive environment right now? And looking specifically in terms of SEO, one of the most important areas is the sort of technical capability of that website. And the technical SEO audit, you can get what some people call an SEO audit for free on the internet. There'll be people who provide you this, but an agency like SiteVisibility will typically do a much more manual, personalized review of perhaps more than 60 factors that impact on your technical SEO capability. And what technical SEO is particularly looking at is how easy is it for Google and its crawlers to come to your website, to enter the website, to understand what your website is all about, to understand what problems your website can solve, and by doing that to enable you to be ranked in the search engine results. There are all sorts of ways that your web developers can make it difficult for Google to do that. And the way to uncover those is through doing a technical SEO audit. And the output will be a roadmap of implementation activities. Before you start link building, before you start doing outreach and digital PR, if you've got a terrible website from a technical SEO perspective, there's just no point doing it, because Google will never know what your website's about. So this is what we call one of the SEO fundamentals. The second stage is the content audit. So this will be where you review or you can review your current on-page content and develop a prioritized roadmap based on the different stages of the content funnel you can see here on this slide. So your website will have content, hopefully, that will be relevant for a user when they arrive on the website, and you're introducing them to your brand. You're trying to gain their attention, hopefully driving some interest to find out more about your products. Once they find your products or your services, you're telling them how great you are, and you may have some case studies or testimonials in there which prompt them to go further, to click on that buy button, or to request a quote, or to fill in a contact form. And all of that content is different and needs to be different in terms of its format, in terms of its intent, in terms of the way it's written. What you would do is do an audit of that to find out which of the content is working and is fine, which of the content needs to be improved and optimized from an SEO perspective, and which of the content's just clearly missing. And those are opportunities for new content. So a content audit's a really critical piece of work. This next stage, which is keyword research, is what I think is the most important area. This is where you look for opportunities, and you're looking for keyword or content gaps. So this is where you'll be looking at what keywords your users, your customers search for, understand which of those keywords and search terms aren't well serviced by your website, and those are opportunities for creating new content that answers those questions and hopes to generate new interest in your website. So the keyword research is super important, needs to be done fairly frequently, certainly on an annual basis, and is a great way to drive competitive advantage. So backlink analysis is really important. The reason why it's important is that Google ranks the authority of your website based on, very simply, the quality and diversity of other places on the internet that are voting for your site and saying that your site is a quality site, and it does what it says it does by giving you a link. And so it's important to look at your backlinks to make sure that you've got the quality links there, you haven't got any spam, and you want to make sure that is effective and useful. And there are a number of tools that you can use to do that, like Ahrefs and SEMrush to do that. So ways of automating that process to a certain extent. And then this is an area that's quite often overlooked in terms of SEO, which is where you need to understand really clearly who the audience is, and understand what their media consumption is, what sort of questions they've got, in a relevant and, we think, a laser-focused way. If this isn't really clear about who your audience is, it's really easy to waste time and money creating content and activity that's irrelevant, because it's not going to an audience that's interested in your product or service. So having a really clear understanding of the audience is important. Of course, competitor analysis is important. We do this in SEO. You need to don't get paranoid about your competitors. However, it is important to understand where they're at, do a SWOT of your competitors using tools to identify keyword gaps, opportunities, threats, and essentially a SWOT of your competitors from an SEO perspective. So the second big area was measuring performance. How do you know if you're being successful? Have we made any money? And in the past, and still sometimes today, SEO is seen as a dark art. We can't measure performance. Well, you absolutely can measure performance. You should be able to understand ROI, and you want to be able to compare how your SEO is performing against your PPC. And on this slide, there are a couple of useful blog posts, and Rife said that she'd share this deck with you afterwards. Have a look at those blog posts and give you some good tips on, and actually this is one of our podcast episodes on performance measurement, and you can read more about it there. And I'm going to show you how we go about doing this. So this is our measurement process. It's led by a measurement and insight team. And the output is an agreed and documented measurement framework. This is essentially our promise, or the SEO agency's promise, for what we're aiming to achieve this quarter or this year. And you can see the detail there for what goes into that. Again, this is all part of your SEO strategy. We need to know what we're aiming to achieve and are we being successful? And so put in place a measurement process. And this is what it looks like. Here's a snapshot of what one of those looks like. This is the promise that you might set at the beginning of the year. So if you're the marketing manager, you've got an SEO strategy and you want to deliver for the business, this is something that you can put in place for your business so that in 6 months' time, you know how you're getting on. It's really important to make sure that when you're measuring that you're using accurate data. So it's important for someone to look at what we call data integrity, and it checks whether there are any data accuracy issues. For example, spam, or your tracking may be out. And if you're reporting the wrong numbers, you're going to get, rubbish in, rubbish out type of information. So make sure you've got accurate data. So budgeting and ROI, this is the third area that was of particular interest. How do you budget for ROI? How do you budget for SEO? Sorry, and what's the return on investment? And this is how we can ensure we can deliver ROI. I mean, the most important thing is that we're really selective with our clients. And if a client wants to jump straight into tactics like link building, and they're not prepared to go through the investment process of the SEO strategy, then we're not going to have a good relationship, and we're not going to be successful in our work. And so there's the approach for how we deal with that. So as I said, we asked the team for what advice would they want to share with you, and here are what we call the 10 SEO Commandments. Again, you're welcome to read these. One of the most important ones is that number 2, which is SEO is an instant. It does take time, so expect to spend a year on your SEO strategy before you're starting to deliver solid results. Number 5 is important currently, page speed. There's something called Core Web Vitals. There's a blog post on our site about it, which is really critical, coming out in June. And another area where, for example, it's important to keep up to date. And the last one made me chuckle a bit. Number 10. If someone offers you SEO optimization services, you need to run away straight away. I'm not going to go through all of those in detail, but there's some sort of good guidance from the team. Here are some big obstacles. These are obstacles for SEO. These are obstacles we face every day. So staying up to date is one of our challenges too. So you are not alone. Google is always changing its activities. It's the way that it wants to rank content. And it's always a challenge. So if you can relate to any of the points on here, you're not alone, and it's not just you. But it is all possible to overcome these. And so in order to overcome these, it's really important to start with the right mindset. And being curious is a great ability for an SEO, and encourage your team to be the same. And it's what motivated us as an agency to start our internet marketing podcast and to get Brighton SEO moving, because it's good to debate and talk about how SEO works amongst your colleagues and contemporaries. So how we keep up to speed as an agency, this is actually how we monitor risks and opportunities. So everyone in the team has at least 1 day paid of training time to practice their own curiosity in any of these different areas and more. These are different disciplines, so technical SEO, or from a content perspective, or from a data perspective, from a link building perspective. All of those areas, there's lots of further reading, and it's all available on the internet. You just need to allow time to invest in your own learning. So coming down to budgets and how to estimate budget. One way to estimate the budget is to firstly ensure that you've got these are the top line thoughts for how you identify how I'm actually going to skip this slide because I think it's jumped in where it shouldn't be, because I was in the how I keep up to speed section, which is important. I can come back to that budget slide if anyone's interested. But the things that I do are I listen to the Internet Marketing Podcast, which we produce. It comes out every week. It's designed for people to keep up to date. There are hundreds of other podcasts available. This one's been alive for 16 years now. It's got 600 episodes. It's full of great content that keeps you up to date. BrightonSEO, you can attend for free. There's the next one's happening in July. There was one in March and another one happening in October. Tickets are free for that. You can attend that for the day and learn. There's stacks on LinkedIn and Twitter about SEO, and I rely on my connections to keep me up to date there. Within your business, you can encourage your team to keep themselves up to date and then share their information with you, share the learnings with you, and that's something that we do as a team. Internally, we use Microsoft Teams as a collaboration tool, and we have an interesting news and ideas section in there where everyone's asked to share ideas. And often, if you have an agency, they'll have one of those too, and you can ask for access to that. We share our news with our clients. You can ask your agency or your marketing department to share that news with you. It's all about sort of sharing that information, maybe talks they've attended. And again, this is how I keep up to speed. We've got departmental meetings where the department owners, say the technical SEO manager, will share their learnings and run through pieces of work that they've done and findings that they've got from that. So again, it's just very much about being transparent with the learnings there. So that sort of takes us down to keeping yourself up to speed. This is the podcast. We've had some amazing people speaking on there. One of the first was Seth Godin back in 2007. We recorded that in the McDonald's at Victoria Station on McDonald's owned Wi-Fi, and that was one of the fun early stages of what's become a really successful and interesting, informative podcast. So I recommend that to you all as well. I'm a little bit over time, but it is time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's so impressive. A weekly podcast. That's brilliant. And over like 600 episodes or something. That's brilliant. Yeah, so let's do this if people want to just raise their hand, or if there's any questions, just feel free to jump in. It was a kind of whistle-stop tour, wasn't it, Jason?
It was slightly rapid. Like I said, there's so much to cover if you want to dive into SEO in any of those areas of technical or on-page content or content marketing, link building. There are day-long sessions. In fact, there are day-long sessions on those at BrightonSEO. So I'm really happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. I'm hoping there might be a few. Were there any in the chat?
I think John's got a question.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't sure whether to unmute or did you want me to write it in the chat? Sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead, John.
Sorry, I was just going to say, how do you, what's your opinion on, so I'm rebuilding my website and all my content after about sort of the last year. My site got really punished by Google and chucked back into with the other bodies on page 6 or something. And I was just wondering what your opinion on, content rating, things like Yoast and stuff like that. What's your sort of, in terms of putting truck into that as a sort of a gauge in terms of writing content?
I mean, there are lots of tools like Yoast that help you do things better. And I guess it's all about how much time you've got to put in this, because the reality is that not everyone has days to invest in their SEO. So I think it's important to use those. If that's all you can do, then you should use them. Yoast is relatively reputable, and there are other tools out there. So I would recommend looking at what alternatives there are, maybe evaluating those yourself. That would be my suggestion. Lots of our clients use tools like that, and we try to help them get a bigger picture view if they're investing more of their time in SEO.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, back on mute.
Go ahead, Katie.
Hi. I was interested in the budget slide that you skipped. I was wondering whether you would be able to get back to it just to see your views on how to budget for SEO.
Sure. Okay. I'll just deal with some other questions, and I'm really happy to come back to that slide. There's a question here from Vicky King from Plus Accounting. What tips do you have as to how to best display results to the leadership who may not have a full understanding of SEO? That's a great question, Vicky. So how do you display your results to the leadership? So it goes back to that measurement framework where at the very beginning of the work, or if you haven't got one yet, over the next month or so, get a common understanding of what good looks like in terms of objectives. So that may be, say, for a B2B business, that you want to be generating 5 quality leads a week, a month, in some, by 12 months time. And that might be an objective. And then you set up your reporting to enable you to, report on how many leads you're getting. And then you just report those results back to your leadership. It's all about, when you're presenting your results, it's always important to understand what you're comparing those results against, because what they're interested in is, are those good results, or is that what we're expecting? Should it be better, or are we absolutely smashing it? So having that comparative against what you agreed with your leadership team, a year ago, is a great insurance policy for you as the marketing manager. You can say, Paul, we agreed this a year ago. I'm exceeding those results. And yeah, so hopefully that helps you with that one, Vicky. We've got another question from Shake It Up Creative. Hi, when something new happens and there isn't much advice and information on it available from others, do you have members of your team that begin testing to find learnings, perhaps with your own brand website, to be thought leaders? Okay, so when something new happens, and if you go, SEOs are, I reckon half of Twitter is the SEO community. There are lots of people on there who've got their own views on what's happening, and will often be sharing, the results of what they found. So a good first place to start is to have a look on Twitter, look at a few of the SEO influencers. In fact, if you go to the Brighton SEO community on Twitter or LinkedIn and ask the question, often, someone will put their hand up and answer that. So it is actually a really generous sharing community. So I would definitely advise, for you to just ask the question on Twitter, mention a couple of SEOs that you might respect, and you'll probably get some answers back, and you can take a balanced view of those answers as to what actually happens. But to answer the second point of your question, in terms of testing, well, that's absolutely critical, and it's important for you to look at ways to test aspects like that in a sort of, but to manage the risks of doing that as well. So Lisa's question, have you got any tips for what key things people need to watch out for when Google finally rolls out its new page experience algorithm update? So what tips have I got for we need to watch out for? I will share a blog post with you on that one, which will answer that in much finer technical detail than I could ever answer that. So this is where, as an SEO, I don't see myself as an SEO. I've run this agency since 2001. We've been doing SEO since the very outset. But I've got people in my team that I rely on to answer questions like that. And if you just ask the community, you'll get answers to these areas. Next question's from Katie Horgan. So I will share a blog post on that, on the page experience algorithm update. So Katie Horgan, can I ask if Google AdWords is worth investing in to push a particular product or service? Is this a service you provide? So that's yes, Google AdWords is worth investing in to push products and services. Google's making billions out of Google AdWords. It works. Yes, we do provide Google AdWords as a service. It's just another marketing channel. if your SEO activity, your SEO visibility isn't performing at the moment and you need some instant visibility, that's where Google AdWords comes in. And it's all part of a balanced digital marketing strategy. AdWords has got its place, good on-page content's got its place, excellent user experience has got its place. Having a site that's technically, set up correctly so Google can spider it is super important. So with Google AdWords, you need to think about how it fits within the overall digital marketing strategy. I'm conscious of the time, but I'm also want to go back to that budget slide. So Rife, you're the boss. Tell me what you would like to do.
Yeah, let's go back to that slide and answer Katie's question.
Okay. Can you see my presentation slides?
Yes, all good.
Okay, good. So this is the slide that I skipped out. So often a client will come to SiteVisibility and just very generally and not know how much they should invest in SEO. Do I need to invest £100 a month like that email I got yesterday that said I can solve all your SEO problems for £100 a month? Or do I need to invest thousands because I'm competing against Procter & Gamble? That's a massive sort of budget range. And there'll be all sorts of factors like affordability that come into this and where you are in your business cycle. But you've got to start somewhere. And so often I'll have a conversation with the business owner around this is firstly, have you got accurate data and analytics? So making sure we're going to do some measurement now. Is analytics something you can trust? So let's assume that you can. So when you look into analytics and you look at all of the traffic that's coming into the website, you can probably identify what proportion of that traffic and revenue is already coming from the organic channel. And as I say here, I'd be really surprised if that figure is zero. So already SEO is delivering some sort of business value to the business. So it's going to be more than zero. And so if you can apportion that traffic into revenue, you can have an understanding of what sort of revenue is reliant on SEO. And think about it as that's the revenue that the SEO strategy's got to protect. Because if your SEO strategy goes pear-shaped, you could potentially lose that revenue. So that's the revenue that's worth protecting, and then hopefully to grow. So then thinking about how much to invest, and this is just one way of doing it. There are hundreds of different ways of doing it, but this seems to work to get things moving in terms of what the budget could be. Work out what the total marketing investment is in non-SEO online marketing. So looking at how much you're spending on your paid advertising, your brand, your events, your exhibitions, your PR, your digital PR, email marketing, and put all of that together. And then work out how much revenue is you're generating that isn't relating to SEO. Looking at your Google Analytics, how much revenue is that generating. And then what you can do is then sort of estimate how much marketing are you prepared to invest per pound of non-SEO revenue. So you can look at you can actually put a financial value against that non-SEO revenue generated by non-SEO marketing, and then apply that value to the SEO revenue that you need to protect. And that'll give you like a broad indication. It's really commonplace for us to find a client that's getting, say, 40% of their revenue from paid search, and they're spending, say, £40,000 a month to generate that 40% of their revenue. But they're getting 60% of their revenue from other channels, including organic, but they're spending nothing on that. And there's a huge opportunity there to, increase the amount of revenue that's generated by SEO and reduce the reliance on paid search. And so this is just one way of providing an estimate. Another way is just to say, look, I'm prepared to invest, £3,000 a month of activity, whatever that might equate to. I'll hire one person and see how it goes. It feels like it's not enough, but it's a start. Measure the performance from that. So that's just one very much a fag packet way to estimate budget. There are much more sophisticated ways of doing this when you've got a lot of when you've got some historical data, and you can look at actually, how much revenue your SEO activity is generating, and then you can make an investment appraisal of that to say what's it worth in terms of investing, and what's the opportunity that you're trying to capture by investing in SEO. So hopefully that answers, maybe that's prompted a couple of other questions.
I think this might be a good time to wrap up. If there aren't any other questions, let's see. Anybody else got any questions? We will share the slides as Jason mentioned, but if there aren't any other questions, thank you so much, Jason Woodford from SiteVisibility. That was fascinating, and thank you to our sponsors, Plus Accounting. Thank you all for coming. Our next session, our next breakfast session, is on the 17th of June with Juliet Spar from Plugin Media. It's around how to get hired as a freelancer. It's for National Freelancer Day, so check out the WiredSussex events page for our future events. We've also got another one in June around employee ownership as well. So thank you again to Jason, and
you're really welcome.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks everyone, and I'll send some links to BrightonSEO, and do register there. It's free. Have a great day.